Thank you for coming out on this cold morning. I don't know, but it feels like the coldest we've had at this time of day so far this winter. My name is Kathy Seidel. I'm so grateful to be the manager of this branch of the public library system, and I'd like to thank you all for coming, and also, of course, thank our partners, Oasis and Historic Albuquerque, Inc., who support us and partner with us in this speaker series. So then that brings us to today's program. Our presenter, Teri Reynoso, has worked for the library system for 5 years. Before that, though, she began as a volunteer here at the Special Collections Library. And then she was lucky enough, we think, to come and join the Special Collections staff about 2.5 years ago. She has a BA in history and an absolute passion for history and research. And she has been working for a little bit now on Janet Kromer's file, but we'll soon be moving on to other things. This also is a digitization project that the library is working on, and we hope to eventually get it up online, the scans for everyone to be able to share. Teri also plans to begin a master's program in library science on the archival records track in the spring. We're hoping for her. So please welcome Teri.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Okay, good. So thank you again for coming out on this very, very cold Veterans Day weekend to see this talk. I'm going to start with my thanks right away and get them out of the way. So thank you if we have any veterans in the audience for the service you gave our country. And thank you to Eileen O'Connell for encouraging me to move forward with this project. Thank you to Catherine Seidel for supporting me when I followed through on this project. And a big, big thank you to all my staff and employees here who listened to me with smiles on their faces, even on days when all I could talk about was Janet Kromer. If anyone is interested, I have citations for all my photographs here on the front table. And then on the table on this side, I have some examples of the notes themselves if you want to look through afterwards. So, today, I hope we can find out the following. Who was Janet Kromer? What are the shopping notes? And what did Janet do to shape the history of Albuquerque? So, everybody recognizes this publication, right? The Albuquerque Progress. It was published by Albuquerque National Bank and is a really great snapshot of the growth and development of the city of Albuquerque. So the staff at Special Collections worked with UNM's digital initiatives and scholarly communications to digitize the Albuquerque Progress. It took the combined efforts of many organizations to complete this project. Along with an index created by staff, the Albuquerque Progress can now be viewed and searched online. So the question came, what next? What other publication was Albuquerque-centric? What publications and Special Collections have a large holding of? Well, Janet Kromer's shopping notes fit all the requirements for our next digitization project. The shopping notes were a privately circulated magazine published from 1948 through 1961. UNM also has holdings, but Special Collection had a larger collection. Plus, we were already having volunteer indexing it. As I transferred the volunteers' notes to an Excel spreadsheet, I wanted to know more about the woman behind the publication. I could find nearly nothing about Janet Kromer, so my research began. So we will start with Janet Kromer, a biography. Her story starts here in White Plains, New York, where Janet Kromer was born Jeanette Miriam Smith on June 28, 1907. She was born to George and Alice Smith. Her arrival was followed the next year by the birth of her brother, Albert. Her brother really helped in my research because there are so many Janet Smiths. There's only one Albert Smith that I could see. So here's the family listed on the 1910 U.S. Census. Her father is listed as a bookkeeper at a knitting mill. By the 1920 census, George, her father, was an office manager. And in 1930, his occupation is listed as none. I'm making the assumption he's retired as opposed to out of work because the Smith family was well off enough to send both of their children to college. Here's Albert. He went to Rutgers. And this is his senior picture from the yearbook. And I wanted to include his picture because he helped me so much with my research. And Janet attended Vassar. So this is from her senior year at Vassar. And this, unfortunately, is the only confirmed picture I have of Janet. Out of all of this, this is the only one I can find. So she graduated in 1929. In the 1930 census, she's back at home with her family, and you can see there she's listed as no longer attending school. Now, this after 1930, I lose her for a while. From 1931 to 1934, her lost years. She was living in White Plains, New York, then she shows up in Santa Fe. I could not for the life of me figure out how that connection was made, but it did. So here's a Janet Smith that shows up in the New Mexico Quarterly for August of 1933. I can't say for sure if this is our Janet. There was another Janet Smith floating around New Mexico at this time. That Janet Smith attended Highlands University, or as it was called then, the Normal College. Janet had later associations with the New Mexico Quarterly, but I can't confirm her in New Mexico until November of 1935. Her obituary, which really was the only thing I could find at first about her, says she moved from Albuquerque to Santa Fe. So I can definitely place her in Santa Fe right here from this article. And so how do I know that this is our Janet? Her association right here with Louis Dry Culture. And that's old Louis right there. Louis was a tenant of Janet during the post-war housing shortage, and that's Janet's house there in the background. So I know that that's our Janet. And for you eagle eyes out there, there's that article again. Yes, Janet was the secretary of a meeting to discuss fascism. Janet was the secretary of the club. It was called the Cultural Relations Club. And the club whose purpose is listed right there, but I'll read it. Maintaining and propagating liberal thought in New Mexico. The club has about half a dozen appearances in the newspaper in 1935 and 36, and seems to have fizzled out. So she came to Santa Fe and joined a socialist club. But 1935 was a really active year for Janet. She begins writing for and submitting articles to the Federal Writers Project, part of the Works Progress Administration. The FWP was described as Congress as holding up a mirror to America. At its height in 1936, the FWP employed about 7,500 people. This is a carbon of one of her later writings, but I chose it because it has her handwritten notes on it. And there she was going by her married name. She hyphened Janet Smith Kromer. This is an article discussing the history of witches and witchcraft in the North Valley. Janet's topics focused on oral histories of longtime New Mexico residents. She interviewed Alfredo Baca, Clara Ferguson, and some others. She also wrote about the history of UNM and an article about libraries in the city, including this one. These articles are now stored as part of the FWP's collection at the Freya Henrico Chavez History Library. So I was lucky enough to get in there before they closed when they lost their librarian. So it was also 1935 that Janet met the man who would become her husband, Tom Kromer. So there he is. I'll give you a little background on Tom. Thomas Michael Kromer was born in Huntington, West Virginia in 1906 to working class parents. His father worked in a glass blowing factory until he was killed on the job. His mother pushed education as she knew it was the only way to better oneself. This is a picture of Tom in his senior year in high school. His draft card described him as 5'11", 150 pounds, with blonde hair and gray eyes. So he was a looker. And I'm showing you every single picture of him because his head cup. So Tom attended Marshall College, now Marshall University. in Huntington on and off between 1925 and 1929. During the off times, he taught at several poor mountain schools in West Virginia to make money for tuition. It was while teaching in the mountains that Tom contracted TB. Out of money and out of luck, Tom decided to bum around the country, starting out by following the harvests. He traveled to Kansas and California and back to the East Coast before he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1933. The CCC was a public relief program that operated from 1933 to 1942 for unemployed, unmarried men. A major part of the New Deal, it provided unskilled manual labor jobs on rural lands owned by the government. So since he had a steady income with the CCC, Tom wrote a novel. It's called Waiting for Nothing, and was published in 1935. And this is a book jacket from it. See his head cup. It was well received, if not well sold. Many today agree it was one of the best first-person accounts of living on the bum during the Depression. In addition to being published in the United States, Tom's book was published in Great Britain the same year. Published excluding Chapter 4. Chapter 4 was deemed too risque for the British population. So, if you're like me, you drop the biography you're reading and went and grab a book to find out what Chapter 4 was about. And it was surprising. Chapter 4 addressed a topic that, according to Tom, was more common than anyone realized. When times were really hard for Tom, he earned money as a sex worker. His book describes his time in New York and the competition between unemployed young men for, and I quote, dates, unquote. After the publication, he returned to West Virginia in an attempt to figure out what to do next. So, when he was home, he ran into a friend from his time at Marshall College. Does anybody recognize that guy? That's Thomas C. Donnelly, the Donnelly Library at Highlands. So he's from Huntington as well. Donnelly was teaching at Marshall, but had just accepted a position at the University of New Mexico, and later became the president of Highlands. Donnelly convinced Tom to move out west for his health and attend UNM. So Tom headed to UNM and enrolled in the fall semester of 1935. According to Donnelly, Tom didn't even last a month. In September of 1935, Tom's TB was so bad, his friends insisted he go to the hospital. Donnelly states that Tom was admitted to St. Joseph's. Multiple sources put both Tom and Janet at St. Joseph's Hospital during the fall of 1935, where they met and fell in love. Janet was being treated for a rheumatic heart condition, Tom for TB. So, I have a lot of problems with that story. Because would 2B patients they would be in a separate wing, a separate building than a rheumatic heart condition patient. But also, Tom doesn't appear in the Albuquerque City Directory until 1936. And this is the 36 directory here. Tom is listed at 801 East Cole. So if we reverse directory that, oops, too far. 801 right here. So that address is the Sunnyside Convalescent Home, not St. Joseph's. Sunnyside will eventually become Albuquerque Convalescent Home, then Hillcrest Sanitarium. So the same city directory lists Janet living at 1712 South Edith. The Federal Writers Program article, Topics, Santa Fe versus Albuquerque, put Janet in Santa Fe until late 1935, maybe early 36. So I did some further research, and this is the Health City Sun from January of 36, and it says, one of our latest arrivals is Tom, who attended university but has taken a few months off to chase the cure. And this last sentence also says, next week he will do a column for the Sun, bringing the latest in news from this place. So that indicates that from here on, he wrote the little section on Sunnyside in the Health City Sun. So, we know the St. Joseph story is bunk. That's not true. Donnelly made that up. I don't know. But I think it's more likely they met working for the Federal Writers Program. Because you can see here, Tom just got located with the Writers Program and considers himself lucky to have something to do. Both of them worked on the history of UNM from the notes that I was able to locate. It was a very nice history that was never published, side note, because President Zimmerman didn't like it. So if you ever want to read it, you can go up there. I think, so like why did Donnelly suggest and other sources suggest the St. Joe meeting? I think at the time, it was because at the time the Federal Writers Program was considered to be employed only by those who were too lazy to work, or worse, with extreme left-wing views. There were suggestions that those involved had no work ethic and would accept any handout. In the Southwest, a WPA writer was known as El Diablo a pie, a devil on foot. Because they would come and ask you questions and want to know about stuff. Tom no longer appears in the Hell City Sun as a resident of Sunnyside after November of 1936. So it's safe to assume he moved from there into a shared home with Janet. In Richard Meltzer's Sanitariums of New Mexico, it states the heating plant in Sunnyside, he called it Hillcrest, but it's the same thing, broke down in 1936. Sunnyside is gone from the Hell City Sun after December of 36. Could this be the reason Tom moved in with Janet? I think so. But either way, they were married on December 19th, 1936. They were married by the Reverend of the First Presbyterian Church when it was still downtown. And the witness were the Reverend's wife and the cleaning woman for the church. So I'm calling that an elopement. Both list their address as 1216 East Central, and that address, by the way, is now part of Presbyterian's parking lot, and you can see it scrolled up there on the top. So once married, Janet continued to write for the FWP, though Tom did not. She wrote under the name Janet Smith and Janet Smith Kromer, and wrote she did. Her list of contributions is very long. In fact, she's featured in these 3 books that we have here at the library. Some of the articles are available online in the Library of Congress's American Life Histories collection. So field workers, as the writers were called, made between $70 and $80 a month, working between 20 and 30 hours a week. So with Janet bringing in a steady income, the couple was able to purchase a home. In August of 1937, they purchased a house in Alameda from A.A. Archuleta of Martineztown. This home dates to approximately 1900 and was lovingly restored by Janet. Somewhere in this time period, sources list both Janet and Tom working summers at, quote, a Navajo school, unquote. One source says it was the Alamo Navajo Reservation, also called Puertecito. This branch of the Navajo Nation is about 35 miles north of Magdalena, New Mexico. I submitted a request to the National Archives to confirm this. Janet does have a personnel record with the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs there. Tom doesn't. His only record is for his time in the CCC. So I could have obtained the actual documents, but it exceeded my budget of $0 for this project. So this letter is just going to have to be enough for us. Janet is listed in the 1940 and 1941 City Directory as the Society Editor of the Albuquerque Tribune. In 1942 and 43, she's listed as the Women's Page Editor for the Tribune. 44, her title is simply Reporter, Albuquerque Tribune. And then in 45, she isn't listed at all. So what happens? Editor to reporter? I can't say for sure, but after looking through years of paper tribunes, as the 40s are not digitized for the Tribune, these are the only 2 articles I could find with her name on them. She was the editor, but it seems in the 30s people people didn't really have bylines. So this one, she's talking about a new gallery open, and this one about a play. And the only reason I found these is because a digitized Santa Fe, New Mexican, I found it and I went back like 2 days because the Santa Fe would take Albuquerque's news from the paper. So here's an article from said Santa Fe, New Mexican, and we're talking about this little blurb right there. It says, Janet was a Life and Time magazine correspondent. So I can confirm the correspondent part at least. Oh, that should be in front of that other slide. Okay, no. This article said that she helped with a Pueblo Indian article in Life in 1943. So here's the article. It's about dams threatening pueblos. But the only credits were for the photographer and, quote, life reporter. So is this the one she worked on? Maybe? Is that Janet right there teaching these Pueblo children? Maybe? They didn't seem to think it was necessary to have credit reporters back in the day. Janet's also mentioned in this archive of Time correspondent submissions. This is housed at Harvard. And it lists, it's one editor's listing of every single submission he received. Now, all of these submissions didn't necessarily make it to the magazine. So I went through these years, 44 and 45, through Time's archive, which is not available online. I had to go through the microfilm. And I couldn't find any articles about Mrs. Sims or coffee producing countries. So this is just one editor's correspondence submission, so I don't know for sure if she was ever published in Time. So here's another image of the Kromer's Alameda home that you can look at while I tell you the sad part. I think it's more likely that Tom caused Janet's shift in career. Although he wrote an unfinished manuscript during his time at Sunnyside, he never published his long-awaited second book. After 1938, Tom started to spiral. He's often described as sick or ill. And although he was still suffering from TB, at this point the sickness crippling Tom was severe depression, self-treated with alcohol. Janet's dear friend Betty Colbert describes Tom as quote, a handsome man of considerable charm with pronounced left-wing views, unquote. The 1940s U.S. federal census lists him as, quote, not employed for pay, unquote, and, quote, unable to work, unquote. Betty went on to say by the mid-40s he was a complete recluse, never leaving the Alameda property. So Janet's no longer writing for the Tribune. There's no submissions from her for Life or Time after 1945. Where did she go? In 1946, Janet pops up in the New Mexico Quarterly writing a book review. Her byline lists her as a former Albuquerque newspaper woman, now teaching on, quote, the Navajo Reservation. Then she's gone again. Until 1948, when Janet tried something new. That is the very first issue of Janet Kromer's Shopping Notes, published in September of '48. We do not own this. The University of New Mexico graciously allowed me to scan all their copies. Janet took money she inherited after her father's death and started a magazine. Tom had become completely dependent on Janet's care. All of the work for the magazine was done by Janet from their home, exclusive of her taking it to the printers. Besides the shopping notes themselves, Janet completely disappears from the public record. She doesn't show up in the newspapers again until her death. In the late 1950s, Janet was stricken with lung cancer. Although she had a staff of writers, Janet was still handling all the advertising for the magazine. Around 1958, Janet and Tom moved to New York so Janet could get x-ray treatments. Eventually, they moved back to New Mexico. Janet died at Presbyterian Hospital on November 19, 1960. An article in the Albuquerque Journal says it was from a heart condition. She was only 53. All the funeral arrangements were handled by Anne Raymond, one of Janet's closest friends. It was described as, quote, a short and bleak service, unquote, at Garcia's mortuary. Less than a dozen people attended. The mourners included her brother Albert, but did not include Tom. Janet was buried in a tucked away corner of Sunset Memorial Park. And I got lost, so I had to go to the office, and they drew me this lovely map, and she's way down here. So this is Manal, and like I-25 is like right here. So she's way in the corner. Janet is buried in a non-perpetual care area in an unmarked grave. So that right there is where she's at. And thank you to this lovely gentleman whose grave was marked, and they told me she's right next to him. So, are we bummed out yet? Because it's about to get worse. So please enjoy this lovely picture of the Rio Grande while I tell the tale. At the time of her death, Janet left the name of 2 people she wanted to sell the magazine. They were contacted, but neither wanted to buy it. The amount of advertising was going down as Janet was no longer soliciting ads. Tom still owned the magazine, but he had no control over it. Friends and colleagues of Janet's were paying to support Tom as he was, quote, very sick at the time, unquote. The house in Alameda falls to disrepair, starting when Janet first became ill. So 1961 dawned darker. And first is Tom's story. Without Janet's constant support in every sense of the word, Tom suffered a nervous breakdown early in the year. Tom's family came to Albuquerque to take him home to West Virginia in April. He is promptly admitted to St. Mary's Hospital in Huntington. He was treated for shock treatments for his nerves. In 1923, he moves in with his mother, who takes care of him, and there he stayed. In 1968, a journalist by the name of Jim Comstock interviewed Tom. Jim had spent years looking for his fellow West Virginian. Here's part of the article Comstock wrote about him. It states, right there in the middle, quote, "The 2 of them ran a shopping guide together. He wasn't sure exactly what happened to it. I could be wrong, but I had a feeling he was tired and just preferred to be alone," unquote. Tom died of a heart attack January 10, 1969, just months after this article was published. So, yeah, I'm sorry. So, now we're going to move on to just a little bit about what happened to the shopping notes. And this is equally sad. So here's an area-appropriate picture of the triangle and the lovely blue sky. So in her later years, as she was battling cancer, Janet relied on her staff to help write on the magazine's content, but Janet always handled the advertising. After 13 years, Janet Kromer's Shopping Notes ends publication in March 1961, the spring after her death. This is an estimation based on her holdings and the beginning of the publication of the Shopping Notes replacement called Memo Magazine. The first issue came out in May of '61. But the real nail in the coffin of the Shopping Notes was this teeny tiny paragraph. This small article ran in the notes would turn into a years-long legal battle. On April 3rd, 1961, Marge White filed suit against Tom and Harriet Tiebold, who was the author of the article, for alleged libel printed in the February 1961 issue of the magazine. So I'll read what it says. It starts right here. Marge White of KOB-TV, off on a 6-month jaunt. True story, persuaded to take a charm course by employers as standard procedure, is knitting little things as she and her husband expect in addition to an already half-grown family. Okay, seems okay, right? Well, Marge did not think so. In the suit, she said Janet Kromer's shopping notes tended to render the plaintiff contemptible and ridiculous in the public estimation. So, what does that mean? Translation. The article implied Ms. White was a bore that needed to attend charm school, and more shockingly, that she was expecting a baby. So, why is that shocking? Ms. White was divorced at the time. Yeah. So, and when they imply half-grown family, they're trying to say that she was too old to have kids. So Ms. White sued for $60,000 in damages. Now here's the two of them. That's Marge White on the left and Harriet on the right. They both had home economics television shows. These hard-hitting home economic Bibles. So both these are actually from 1955, but as you can see, KOB and then Code, so there was a little bit of tension between them. So although Tom was the legal owner of the magazine and named in the suit, he had already moved to West Virginia by this point and had no involvement in the court proceedings. So the case went back and forth. So we got dismissal of suit, libel awarded, appeal, and then it went all the way to the New Mexico Supreme Court. After 3 years, in April of 1964, the New Mexico Supreme Court overruled the verdict. And this is from their actual ruling. It says, quote, "In view of our holding that the publication was not libelous per se, and that appellee having failed to allege or prove special or actual damages." So, now we've got all the sad part out of the way. Let's talk about the notes themselves. So, what were Janet Kromer's shopping notes? This is Janet's very own description from the first issue. And in there it says, quote, "I hope eventually to make it an inclusive shopping guide as well as a women's magazine with distinctly Albuquerque flavor." So that's from the very first issue. So she basically told me we needed to digitize this magazine. So this is from the very last issue. The magazine was not subscription-based, but privately circulated. So the difference there is you had to ask to be put on the circulation list. So you could do that oneself by asking Janet directly. You could request a friend who was already getting it to do so. Or you could ask a business mentioned in the shopping notes to forward your request to Janet. When it ended publication, Janet Kromer's shopping notes had a mailing list of 3,400. Of course, you know, she started in 48 and ended in 61. That was Albuquerque's population boom, so it's hard to judge how much of the population was really getting the magazine. In 1950, Albuquerque's population was about 96,000, but by 1960, it was 200,000. So I get maybe 0.5% of the population read it. From what I can read, this was kind of the magazine, you read it and passed on to your friends. So I think a larger base of the city was reading it than the mailing list implied. So all the income from the magazine came directly from the advertisers. Janet requested in nearly every issue to mention the notes, as she puts right here, so the advertisers knew that that's how you found out about their business. It was published monthly, and it was a small, glossy magazine of about 25 pages. And here's one of them right here. I also have some on the table. I hope you can take a look at those after the talk. 50% of the magazine was advertisements. So the longest article in the magazine was called "Let's Talk Shop." It was nearly half the print space was devoted to it. It focused on individual stores and or specials they were having, and also discussed dining options in the city. The article discussed new products, trends, design ideas. So I have a little bit of an article here. It's saying, you know, you're not a good housewife unless you know how to make a cherry pie, so you better go get your stuff from Corber's right there. And then this one talks about Hoyt's Dinner Bell, which is a popular restaurant there, I think on Central, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so, and you can tell UNM scans have this lovely sepia tone compared to ours. That's how you know that. So I'm going to digress for a moment to show you this. This is the Hell City Sun from December 18th, 1963. I'm sorry, 36. The day before Janet and Tom were married. Right after Tom moved to Sunnyside. So does it look a little familiar? Here's Let's Talk Shop from the Janet Kromer shopping notes. And here's gifts for everyone for Health City Sun. So we got the same business is bold here, it's in capital letters here, it's like the same like columns. So when I saw this, I started sifting through years of Health City Sun and discovered this Gifts for Everyone was a very common article in the weeks before Christmas from 1936 to about 1941. And then I found this, Merry Christmas from Tom. So how much of the shopping notes did Tom write? Did Janet write the articles for the Sun? Who knows? I think Tom was more involved than we're led to believe, but of course it really wasn't appropriate, or how many women would read shopping tips from a man. So the gifts article doesn't appear in the Health City Sun after 1941. I'm not sure why, but that's the year the Health City Sun really shifts from sanatorium gossip to like legal notices. So. Okay, back to the notes. These are some other regular articles. On the left here we have At Home. And this was an article that they would pay a visit to a couple or a family at their home, and it would focus on interior design. There were always photos included. This one right here is about General Mills, who took over as commander of Kirtland Air Force Base, so this is about his home. This is called Person to Person. It's the gossip column, and that's the part that got them in a little bit of trouble. This is the same exact page. Look at the print difference. Harriet had a lot to say when it came to gossip. We have here two more types of articles in Food Fancies, which was one woman from Albuquerque would give you recipes and menu ideas from her kitchen. This here is a recipe for St. Cecilia Society of Charleston's famous punch. And then this is for beauty's sake, which was about tips about grooming and stuff like that, and then it always contained beauty ads with it. So this is one of my favorite, or two favorite articles. This was Among the Arts. This really focused on New Mexico artists, exclusive of this one. So it's a great way to look at who was active in the city in the 50s. This article is about an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And this is ways you can recreate some of the interior designs they have placed there. And this is coming up over here, which is a listing of events that were coming up in the next couple months. And Box Hall is heavy in that calendar because this was the place to be. So in addition, there were also paid advertiser columns, and this one on the left is fun. It's called Banks Are People, sponsored by the Albuquerque National Bank. It was written by, Betty Teller. It spotlighted one employee and what they did for the bank. So every month it was a different employee, so this is our fellow there. And there was also Memo from Townhouse, which was a women's clothing store. It was tips and trends new to the fashion world, and it was written by the Townhouse's owner, Dorothy Cook. Two other articles, or one that had two different renditions. It was called Just a Word to the Wise. And this was published by the Public Service Company of New Mexico, now known as P&M. It was Cooking and Cleaning with Electricity. And it was written by the Home Service Director, and it was mostly this lovely gal here, Laverne, plus a couple other people. It changed briefly from notes from Reddy's Rendezvous, which is a really interesting topic that I think it needs a talk of its own. Eileen and I thought for a long time that this was some sort of like bar or restaurant, but it was like a maker space that P&M offered where you could go and meet and cook and try recipes out. Very interesting. So it went back to the little article after a few years. So there was also random topical articles. So right here we have, they're talking about Enchantarama and these beards and near beards, because we all know about the beard growing contest for the Albuquerque's 250th anniversary. This is about the road show here. And this little article is about the Albuquerque Progress. Okay. The notes are also so why do we care about this? Why are we interested in this? My opinion is there's no better snapshot of the 1950s Albuquerque than the shopping notes. It's even better than the Journal of the Tribune because nearly everything contained within its covers is exclusive to Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I'm no apologist, and I'm going to mention this now. This is a snapshot of Anglo Albuquerque. As my volunteer put it, if you browse the names in the magazine, you wouldn't think Albuquerque had a Hispanic population. Hispanic and Native names do appear in the Among the Arts section, but the article fades towards the late 50s. The magazine shifts to more of a society-based orientation and less on Southwest culture. This is something that persisted as Janet became sick and after her death. By the time she died, the magazine contained photo spreads of society events and less cultural events. So, more importantly, the shopping notes track the migration of the population of the city. It tracks it through the location of where you shop, because you want to shop close to home, right? So we start here in Old Town with Harvey Kaplan, who is one of the major photo credits for the notes. And then here downtown at Boggs. And then we slowly move east to the University District with this photograph studio on Yale. It's now, I think, a shoe repair place. And then we are over at Nob Hill on this side. And in its final issue, they talk about the opening of Winrock Center. And yeah, this is the very final issue, and they talked about the big gala opening. And that's, anyone hasn't seen what Winrock looks when it opens, they already did. And interestingly, there's a lot of businesses from the North Valley also represented in there, and I'm sure that's because Janet lived in Alameda and had to come down forth to go to the printers. So we have the Robin Hood Inn, which apparently was the place to be, and then Bush's Bake a little closer into town. So what other businesses were represented in the shopping notes? Yeah, there's a lot you'll recognize. We got Harper's Furries right here, which I was so sad to notice they finally took down the sign recently. That was so sad. We got American Furniture right here, and Franciscan Maple Shop. Here we have Albuquerque National Bank, Corvers, and I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher, I never say this right, Franchini's? Yes. So, and maybe some articles that you knew, or businesses you weren't familiar with, but they're just too much fun to save away. So this is Eckert's, which was on Central, what's that place called? Urban Outfitters is now. So this is a spread they ran for about a year. This is their point. They're making their point about how great they are. And it's these poor housewives awkwardly positioned with swords. And then we have Savage and Saganini. A clothesline almost caused a lawsuit. And then we have Hopalong Cassidy Savings Club that is only available at East Central, so don't you dare go downtown trying to open a savings account. So, shaping Albuquerque's history. The notes were a literal who's who of Albuquerque. This right here is a listing of all the people mentioned in the notes that were also listed in the 1957 Who's Who of New Mexico. And this is only what we've indexed through 1955. So I'm sure it'd be even more. This more interesting than the people mentioned in the notes is the people that actually wrote for the notes. I'm going to go through a little bit of a highlight reel, not completely inclusive of some of the authors. This here is Elizabeth Sisk, right here. She wrote the Food Fancies article from the mid-50s through the end of the publication. Elizabeth was also a piano teacher for years, eventually teaching at the Dansville School of Music. She was the president of the Women's Association of the Civic Symphony. She was also a founding member and vice president of the New Mexico Music Teachers Association. This here is Sally Harrington. She also wrote for the notes, and there are much better pictures of her, but she is just so sassy there. She made the visits required and wrote the at-home article. She also contributed in another very important way. Sally lent her car every month to Janet so Janet could drive it to the printers to print. In the late 1950s, Sally worked as a realtor. She moved on to work with the Albuquerque Light Opera almost from its inception. She starred in numerous productions, then moved on to costume design in the early 60s. As a member of the board of directors, she was a member of the board of directors as well. In the early 70s, she opened Starlight Galleries in Old Town. We have Julia Tappan here on the left with the black glasses. She wrote Food Fancies and the At-Home articles. She also worked for the Soil Conservation Service, now part of the USDA, traveling through the state teaching children that everything comes from soil. She taught with her longtime companion, that's Anne Raymond Bear. Anne also wrote for the notes. So here's an article from the notes themselves about Anne and Julia going to Haiti. So Anne left the notes to write for the, an extra picture here, wrote for the Albuquerque Entertainment Guide. She went on to become a member of the tourist committee for the Chamber of Commerce. In addition to writing for these notes, Anne was also the friend that arranged Janet's funeral. So another writer of the at-home articles was Betty Colbert. And you might recognize her name, as Betty was a renowned New Mexican potter. But before she did that, she worked for years in advertising, first for Hubbard's department store, then KBEF radio, and of course she wrote for the notes. To shift slightly, remember Janet's home that she restored but that sadly fell into disrepair? In September of 1962, it was purchased by another person who loved it just as much, famed architect Harvey Hochschild. Well, and you know him as his work on the First Unitarian Church here in Albuquerque and the restoration of the Chemo Theater. The Kromer House, as is now called, appeared in many home magazines in the 70s. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1982. Our final shopping notes writer also appeared in the 1957 Who's Who of New Mexico. This is her paragraph. She was a member of the board of the New Mexico Cancer Society, Bernalillo County TV Association, staff member for the Albuquerque Civil Defense, editorial staff, Albuquerque Journal. So who did this paragraph of achievement belong to? Our old friend, Harriet, the plaintiff in the case against the shopping notes. As we know, Harriet wrote the gossip column called Person to Person. She was also the editor of the women's page for the Albuquerque Tribune, and she was the editor of the 1957 Who's Who of New Mexico. Harriet also co-authored the book Southwest Gardening and graciously donated 3 copies to the Albuquerque Public Library. You see that? I went looking, we didn't have those copies. We had this copy from a 57 edition, and here's the inscription inside. It says, for the Albuquerque City Library as a gift from the authors through the alumni of the Mortar Board for the occasion of this annual benefit tea to the Southwest Library Bookshop. So the Mortar Board, alumni of Mortar Board was a predecessor sort of to the Friends, but they exclusively raised money and donated to the Southwest Collection, which the majority of still is in this building. Harriet was the chairman, and they did say chairman, of the Committee on the Arrangement for the Duke and Duchess of Albuquerque's visit in 1956. She was the organizing member of the New Mexico Press Women's Association and was elected president during its first full year of operation. Here's a picture of her and Betty Colbert in an article about the talk the association was hosting. So, Janet Kromer certainly made change in Albuquerque. I don't know the answer of how a left-wing artistic type married to a scandalous alcoholic author became the author of Society in 1950s Albuquerque, but she did. She might be forgotten, but those who worked with her and were part of her inner circle went on to be important to the development of Albuquerque as a cosmopolitan city. I hope you'll take some time to browse through Janet Kromer's shopping notes and see for yourself. Thank you. Any questions?
of the guides here.
Yeah.
We can take them out.
Yes, they're in Mylar just to protect them, but please feel free to put your hands. Yeah, Peter.
Just a digression, a footnote about Time Magazine, you were talking about bylines. They had a formal policy to have no bylines.
Oh, really?
For decades. That was Henry Luce's idea. And in fact, it became parodied. It was called Time Speak. And it was parodied by a lot of intellectuals of that era. I think they started maybe having bylines in the 70s or 80s sometime like that.
Yeah, that would explain. Can't find there. Yes, Richard.
At the end of page, or at the bottom of every page one, it would list the printer's name, and she stuck with Valiant Printing Company,
She sure did.
and they were in business until just a few years ago.
Yeah, Janet was anything and loyal. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You spent a lot of time with this project.
I did.
Yeah. And I was wondering, what was it that, 'cause maybe I missed it at the beginning, but what was it that really captured your imagination? I mean, I assume this wasn't just an assignment from the Special Collections head librarian, but you had this rich resource, right?
Yeah.
But there were probably other choices that you could have made. What was it that hooked you on this?
Well, usually when we digitize something or we create an archive, we put like a little paragraph biography or just like what this is and what this is all about. So that's what I was doing. I was trying to just say, she was born, she died, this is it. But there was nothing about her.
Right.
So that made me upset that how could she make this magazine for this many years, but there's nothing about her. So I decided to make something about her. And she did not have children, and her brother Alvaro did not have children. So she really doesn't have a, genealogical legacy. So I felt like I should make one for her. Yay.
And your enthusiasm for the research process clearly comes through. Yeah.
I do love a research.
Yeah, twists and the turns. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, well, thank you all for coming. Oh, yes, ma'am.
I just want to say, as part of the Franchini family,
Oh, yes.
my dad's and grandfather's store was advertised in all of these. And when I was going through their things after my parents passed away, I found this whole stack
Oh, really?
of these shopping notes, and I didn't know what they were. So, but thanks to Richard Avery, he found an article about my family. So my grandparents were featured in one,
Oh,
the
yeah.
store was featured, the spaghetti sauce recipe.
It was so funny. They opened another location on 16th, I think.
14th Street.
And so the ad said, please, there's plenty of reasons why to come this far over. Like they were really selling. It was so far away. Yeah. They mostly had an ad on the back. Most of the back covers of their ad.
Right, yeah, it was great. So thank you very much for doing it, because I always wanted to know what this was all about. So this is very good.
Yeah.
Do you still have those copies?
Yes. I was going to go through them and bring something, but I didn't have time because I was.
We do have missing issues in our collection. UNM covered most of them though, yeah, but UNM's is not complete either, so.
Hint, hint.
I never said that. Well, thank you all again, I really appreciate it.